for another amazing, outstanding, and wonderful episode of The Gruesome Twosome in ATT Confidential, where Zell and Andrew can suck our asses, because this is Braden and Dan. And I'm Braden.
And I'm Dan. ATT Tag Team Champions of the
Gruesome
ATT Wrestling League.
ATT WF.
Soon to be a thing. That'll happen.
So what we're talking about tonight is we're talking about the Mantell UFO incident. We briefly referenced this on case file 181, which was the Japanese UFO flight. And we mentioned it because part of the reason some of the actions that were taken in that case file by the Japanese pilot was because he was aware of an incident with the UFO, referred to as the Mantell UFO incident, where a pilot actually lost their life. We briefly mentioned it. We didn't talk too in depth in it. There's not a lot to this case. It's a pretty straightforward. I don't think we could have done a full case file on this one. It's pretty short.
It's pretty cut and dry. And like you said, yeah, Captain Terauchi, who was piloting Japanese Airlines 1628, when they asked him if he wanted military intervention for the sighting that was occurring or the aircraft that he had sighted, he said no, because he was aware of this Mantell UFO incident, which happened on January 7th of 1948. This happened in the southern part of Kentucky. So this was over Franklin, Kentucky, any of our Kentuckians who live out there. And like we said, this is one of the few UFO incidents, legit UFO incidents that we know of, where a person lost their life as a direct result of pursuing a UFO. And then there are the rumors that they had engaged in some type of combat, or perhaps there was evidence, or there was interpreted that perhaps Captain Thomas F. Mantell, who the case is named after, had engaged in some sort of combat with this UFO, but we'll get to that. So this whole incident spans pretty much, it's almost like a full day, or at least half a day. So
yeah, I'd just say half a day is probably a better description.
Right. So about like 1:20 p.m., you had at least Technical Sergeant Quentin Blackwell, who was working in the tower of Godman Army Airfield at Fort Knox, Kentucky, received a phone call from military police in the area saying they had received phone calls from the Kentucky State Highway Patrol, who said that they were taking a lot of phone calls, or they were fielding a bunch of phone calls about something that had been flying around the area that did not match descriptions or could be identified as a plane or any type of aircraft that they were familiar with.
And this is 1948, January 7th. So it's, this is an older case, but people are well aware of what planes are at this point. So it's not one of those cases of like, this is the first ever the plane I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, these people would have seen them. So this is something they've never seen before. That's causing concern enough that, cops are called and highway patrol is seeing it, and they're making calls to the military. It's that concerning. Yeah. I guess right after the war too, you'd be kind of like, you're still a bit on edge. I remember. Like, when did Pearl Harbor happen?
Like 1941.
Right. So it's not like that long ago. Like, it's still in the memory of, like, I'm not saying that there's anything, I don't know if there's any important objects in Kentucky. Not saying that Kentucky's not important. Right.
Yeah. So you had dozens of people calling about this strange aircraft that had been flying around, or not necessarily flying around, but what actually marked it as unusual for most of the people who cited it, they said that it was hovering in the air, like stationary in some parts. Like it definitely wasn't a plane, definitely had a round shape. And according to some of the reports, it even seemed to glow at some points, or it seemed to give off a whitish or an amber glow, according to some of the witnesses who were observed this craft or this aircraft phenomenon floating around their towns, or at least, nobody seemed to be directly under it, but most of the people seemed to see it from a distance. And
it was just like moving remarkably slow. Like if anything, like from the reports and stuff that I looked at, it's like that was like everyone was like commenting on how slow moving this thing was. It was almost as if it was just drifting in the sky. Right.
And
you can, like a Goodyear. Is this a Goodyear? Is this the first time when was the first flight of the Goodyear blimp?
This is the first secret test flight of the Goodyear blimp. Yeah, this is the prototype for the Goodyear blimp. Now, like Brayton said, this was 1948. So the year before, 1947, that's when you had Roswell. So you had the Roswell crash. That was probably still kind of within the people's minds. And the people who lived around this area, like there are a number of air bases, or there were a number of air bases around and in Kentucky, like Fort Knox is not necessarily an air base, but military bases and things like that. Military aircraft in the area, people would be able to recognize it. And from some of the reports and some of the interviews with the witnesses from the people who investigated this, like the Air Force and FAA and things like that, you had people who were like, the way they talked about their sightings, it's like, I know what a plane sounds like. And there's people who were, farmers who were familiar, they're out in the field all day. And some of them talked about how they could recognize like engine sounds.
I know what an airplane sounds like. Well, like they would also know what the Goodyear blimp looks like, because the first flight of the Goodyear blimp was 1925. So,
oh damn, right. Yeah. So, this is the advanced. This is the one they built with alien technology.
But here's the thing. Then what I'm thinking is, if it's not the Goodyear blimp, this might be a bona fide UFO case.
That's what sold it for you.
Yeah.
Well, so around 2:45 p.m., you had 4 F-51D Mustangs of Sea Flight of the 165th Fighter Squadron out of the Kentucky Air National Guard were already up in the air, and they were asked to go ahead and approach the object. So just to go see if they could get eyes on whatever this thing was that they were getting phone calls about. So you had these aircraft, P-51s. These are Mustangs. You look them up. They are the very quintessential, World War II prop fighters, single prop fighters. Whatever you think of when you think of like.
I think of the ones with like the jaws on the front.
Right. Yeah. So it's pretty much that. And so these are maneuverable fighter aircraft. I don't think that necessarily these ones were equipped for fighting. I think they were doing some type of transport duty at the time. But in their en route, they were asked, because they were in the areas, to go ahead and check out what this thing was. So the person commanding this was Captain Thomas F. Mantell. And so
which is crazy to me, because like, this isn't a grizzled, like when I first started looking at this and heard about it, I thought this was some grizzled, like fucking veteran. Yeah, I've got more years in the sky than you do alive kind of guy. He's 25 years old at this point, right? Like, think about what you were doing at 25, or if you're not 25, think about you in a few years being the captain of flight. I'm like, I was nowhere responsible enough.
So Captain Mantell is relatively young at 25 years of age.
He's basically Maverick from Top Gun.
Yeah. I wouldn't. Well, I don't necessarily think
he's Goose.
It might be Goose.
I guess he's more of a goose.
He does have a official like military record, and I think he's actually a pretty distinguished pilot. But like Brayden said, I mean, he's not a whole bunch of experience fighting. I think he mostly flew transport jobs. during World War II, or during the end part, or last couple years of World War II. He was flying transport for a couple of airplanes. But I'm pretty sure he had a distinguished career. I think he won an award or two for doing, I think during D-Day. So he's not your total new guy. He's not a complete wet behind the ears newbie at this, but he does decide to take his aircraft, his P-51 Mustang, up to 15,000 feet to where he radios the tower, and they have records of his transmission.
And he said, "Tower, I got the need for speed."
Something like that. He said he said that the object is above me and appears to be moving about half my speed. And then later it said that he would report that this thing is metallic and it is tremendous in size. So there's a little bit of dispute about whether, I think he said tremendous or monstrous in size. There's some word choice.
Well, either way, it's unfortunate that he passes away, because like tremendous in size and monstrous in size, like it paints a picture, but not an accurate picture in your head. Like that could be anything. Like, what are we talking? The size of a football field, twice the size of that. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to paint a realistic picture of what happened. And it's unfortunate that this is what we have to go on. But, that being said, as someone who had flown in D-Day and stuff, I guess it does lend some weight to him saying tremendous, that he'd seen a lot of, other kind of flying crafts. So saying something's tremendous in size, it would have to be, I would assume that it's probably bigger than most things he's ever seen in the sky.
Yeah, I mean, he's able to judge the size. Now, if you're picturing in your head like Mantell pretty much pulling like a straight climb, going after this thing like as fast as possible, I think that's you'd probably be a little bit inaccurate. Now, that's what I imagined in my head. That's
what I did too. Yeah,
he gunned the engine, and he fucking slams the throttle forward and starts going all the way up after this thing as soon as he sees it or gets eyes on it. But looking it up, it's actually the way the Mustangs climb, or aircraft of that time climbed. I'm not sure they probably still do it today, but to increase your altitude, like you go in circles. You don't go straight up. Like you don't go on a vertical climb and then, and then just gun it all the way up.
Everyone knows you stall and the prop just goes
right. So
and then you plummet.
In order to get up there, it took a good amount of time for him to actually get up there. So from it's like 2:45, you had them kind of doing this thing, and then it's like, I think from there to like 3:10. Now he had other pilots with him who were accompanying him while they were trying to get a closer look at this object. You had Lieutenant Clements and you had Lieutenant Hammond, who actually ended up turning back at about like 13,000 feet or so. Now, these certain aircraft, the P-51s, were equipped with oxygen equipment, and military regulations at the time required that oxygen be used above 14,000 feet. So Hammond radioed back that they were abandoning the intercept, but Mantell, who actually on his aircraft had no oxygen equipment, had continued to go after the craft, and he didn't acknowledge the message from Hammond. So Hammond radioed to him, said, "I'm turning back. I don't have enough oxygen for this." And I don't think Mantell had the things there. But then Mantell didn't even, respond to the message.
Which is interesting, because I was thinking about that. When I was looking through, and it said nothing that these things were equipped for any kind of like dog fighting or anything like that, other than getting a look at it, which he already had. I can't understand his reasoning for maintaining pursuit of this object.
Yeah, and like kind of the record around here gets a little bit shaky because nobody really had eyes on Mantell at this point. You had the two pilots like breaking off pursuit, and Mantell was the only pilot at around estimate. I think it's around 3:10 p.m. is the next kind of timestamp. Is that he was the only one left chasing this object alone at 23,000 feet. And then at 3:15, about 5 minutes later, everyone lost radio and visual contact with him. They couldn't raise him on the radio and nobody could see him. And so after they lost contact with him about 2 hours later, about 5 p.m., they started the search for Mantell. And unfortunately, they found on a farm in Franklin, Kentucky, the remains of Mantell's F-51, which was pretty much scattered, pieces of it, around half a mile. So the plane had pretty much broken apart or seemed to be broken into pieces and spread out over half a mile. And eventually they found Mantell's body, which was inside the broken cockpit. And they found he had his watch on, and they were able to see that his watch had stopped at 3:18 p.m. And that's when they kind of assumed that, shit had gone wrong.
Which is weird that his watch had stopped so... Like, do you think that could be just coincidence that it stopped after everyone had lost contact? Or are they saying that, like, he potentially hit the ground at 3:18? I just found it peculiar that the watches stopped. And I guess I only find that peculiar because we look at we see a lot of sci-fi movies and stuff like that where, aliens or some paranormal presence is around and your clock stops ticking. Because I'm not thinking he had a digital Casio. I'm thinking this is an analog watch. I just kind of found that peculiar that it stopped at 3:18.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about like the reason for the stoppage. I know it's commented on, and that and in the investigations, like this is what gave them kind of the reasoning. They reasoned that this was the time that the thing, and it's probably somewhere in the investigation notes, probably somewhere just mentioned real quickly, but I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember exactly what type of watch he was wearing.
Let's just think about that. I don't think there was any kind of digital watches in 1948.
No.
So this is an analog watch.
Yes.
Now, I guess there's two theories. So if they had by 3:15, that's the last visual contact they have with him. So he hasn't crashed. That gives 3:15, 16, 17, 3 minutes before the watch stoppage. So either the coincidence is that his watch just happens to stop after everyone loses visual contact with him, just purely coincidence, and then he crashes. Or the plane crashes and it stops on impact. I think there's not enough, like, I think the watch stopping by itself is too much of a coincidence in the air at that time right after. I find that portion of it, even when I was going through it, I was like, this is very strange. The watch stop, I kept getting hung up on the watch. I wish we knew more about it. I wish we knew if it was like a hand cranked one. Would they stop on impact? Like 3:18, I wonder how fast the free fall is from 23,000 feet. Would you hit the ground in 3 minutes?
So yeah, going down, let's see, straight down, all the way down from like third. What was he at? What did we say he was at? Like
he was at 20. He was left alone at 23,000 feet.
I don't like. I know his watch stopped. Let's see. So his watch stopped then, and then
because we know they saw him at 3:15, so that only gives 3 minutes for something to happen to that watch. And I'm just saying, like, is there a possibility that if it was like one of those hand wound watches that it just...
All right. There it is it's a analog watch. So it's like a wrist watch. I'm not exactly sure what exactly watch that he was wearing, but they said that it was shattered, and it stopped at 3:18 p.m., which gave them the evidence that they needed to reason that it had stopped on impact. So when he had crashed, that's when it stopped the watch. Okay.
Now, the other thing is about this, before we get into the investigation and stuff, is I'm sure Mantell, being a seasoned pilot, he had flown at various heights. I'm going to equate this to like when you're diving and doing like scuba diving, a lot of instructors and stuff and teachers, and you will dive to a depth. Like, you're only safely supposed to dive to 30 meters, but some people will dive a little further to push the limits in order to see what happens to their body and how fast. What's it called when you get drunk underwater?
Are you talking about? I know that altitude sickness is hypoxia, but is it,
when you go down far enough past 30 feet, you start to feel drunk.
Right.
And some people test like how with it they are in case they had to rescue someone.
Right.
So I'm going to assume that Mantell had flown at either these heights or near these heights before in training. Because again, I just don't understand running the risks to just get another visual on this thing, which you've already seen. So I kind of wondered if he was in some sort of trance from this thing, whatever it was.
So yeah, like I said, hypoxia, which is kind of the foremost theory about what happened or maybe affected Mantell's judgment in going after this craft. Symptoms, even mild symptoms, can probably begin at as low as about 6,000 feet, or just about slightly higher than Denver, Colorado's altitude or above sea level. And people,
nitrogen narcosis, that's what it's called.
That's the other one. Yeah. That's from like the mixture in your thing, right? Or
yeah. And the depth. Yeah. Right. You start to the nitrogen like starts to go into your blood or something.
Starts to hit different.
Yeah. Starts to hit different at 30 meters under the sea.
So people traveling around like 9,800 or 10,000 feet are usually and well below 14,000 feet are required to use oxygen in aircraft, and that's according to Army regulations. So he would have been aware of those. I'm not necessarily sure if he had a lot of experience flying at those high altitudes, because I don't think you would engage at combat like at those altitudes. Most of his, like, he was flying transport duty, so I don't think they were flying necessarily like super high. So don't think it. Plus, his aircraft didn't have oxygen equipment. The other ones were like running low. I think one had like a faulty one, but they had been in the air for kind of like a good amount of time, and I don't think they were equipped to do this. So the other two made the judgment call to go back, and Mantell kept going. Whether his state of mind was affected by hypoxia, I mean, that's still kind of up in the air because we don't really know, but they lost the fact that he didn't answer any radio calls. I mean, it's strange for sure that he didn't answer any radio calls. Like, the last thing he said is, this thing is huge, it's metallic, and then boom, and then it's out. So the mundane explanation being that, he passed out soon after he gave that last transmission. Plane goes into a tailspin or a spin, comes in tight, and then he
breaks apart.
Right. It breaks apart because the P-51, I don't think is not rated for that fast. So once the spiraling dive comes down at about 30,000 feet,
it just pulls itself apart.
It just rips apart. And that's why you get the spread of the crash. So, one witness on the ground, William C. Mays, reported that he saw the aircraft as it circled at that altitude, and then watched it fall from the sky, and it broke apart. And he had actually signed an affidavit hours after the accident. So it's like you had people who witnessed the crash and people and saw the plane coming down, and not necessarily. Yeah. I mean, there's no reports really of that I'm aware of flashing lights or anything like that. He didn't hit him with the laser or stuff like this. You will get, there is this one report about there was like tiny holes or something within the craft, or somebody reporting that they saw small, like punctures or something within the craft and in the cockpit. But apparently that is something that is reported, but it's not necessarily that was ever verified. Like, the first reports of that actually popped up, I think, in the 1960s or 70s in a UFO book that was addressing like multiple cases, and kind of mentioned it in passing without any real reference. It just said that, implying that something
shot him down. Plane. But I would say you could argue that that's probably not the case based on the same fact that they know that Mantell was either dead or unconscious when he hit the ground, because there was no attempt to abandon the aircraft to pull his emergency chutes or anything. The canopy was still locked. So like they can basically piece together that he was either dead during the spiral or unconscious the entire time.
Yeah. So the accident investigation went on for a while. Like it was pretty. I mean, it's pretty clear cut and what they thought physically happened.
Yes, but at the same time, they saw this unknown craft, right? So I mean, that probably throws a little bit of the wrench into it. The investigation.
So the investigation of the crash seems pretty clear cut about what happened, and they're able to put together a pretty clear story. The investigation of the aircraft, on the other hand, of what this thing was, is a little bit more complicated. It's pretty thorough. You can find a lot of reports about it and stuff, because it was investigated first by it was put on the Project Sign. It was put under there. So Project Sign being the precursor to Project Blue Book. I think it came before or after Project Grudge, either one. So you had them going in here. So it was a very, this was a government run investigation in the first, and the Air Force did theirs too to back them up. And you had them go out into the field. They took official written testimonies from service members and people who had witnessed the aircraft itself, who had been manning the direction finding stations and stuff. You had one person, I think Albert R. Pickering is probably one of the people who gave the most detailed accounts, or probably the most relevant ones. And he had written, at least in his statement on January 14th, 1948, about a week about a week after the crash, they had interviewed him, and he had given his details of what he had saw in reference to this craft. So he reported seeing this thing moving from one place to another. It seemed to have a tail that was visible and seemed to be about 5 times the length of the object. So it had some sort of tail that was trailing out behind it. And it said that this thing had gone up and down. It seemed to decrease and increase its altitude. And then it would go very near the ground, and then it would stay there for about 10 seconds, and then it would climb back up at a fast rate, is what he said. And then back to its original altitude, which he estimated around 10,000 feet, and then leveling off. And then he said it disappeared into the overcast that they were having that day. So you had this thing that was moving, and he described the movement as being like an elevator. So it went like straight up, straight down. It wasn't like it didn't go to like a
that erratic movement of like that kind of movement is what you hear all the time with some of these objects.
Yeah, his estimate about how fast it was moving, I mean, he said is somewhere greater than 500 miles per hour in level flight. He said that he was able to see it and observe it for about 20 minutes, and there was no sound that could be detected from where he was at the time. So, and I don't think anybody, I think a lot of the interviews and reports that they got about this craft, nobody reported hearing any sound from this craft.
Yeah.
So you had other members who confirmed Pickering's observations, including the civilian crew, one of the civilian crew, a tower operator by the name of Alex Boudreau. Boudreau. And he said that this thing appeared to be cone shaped. He described it as being blunt on the top and then tapering off towards the bottom. To him, it seemed that this object was glowing, and it was like a bright white, and like I said before, amber color, which is backed up by other reports saying that this thing seemed to be of like at least like a whitish color. A lot of people say, it was like seemed to be either emitting light or reflecting light of some type. And then there was some type of small streak trailing this object.
So the one thing that I wish we had some, because we have the cone shape, blunt on top, tapering off towards the bottom. So it's like when I picture in my head, I imagine the point side down. And because we don't have any description. This is what I assumed, but I just assumed that it moved in that shape. Like it didn't turn to propel. Like it didn't, if it was going up, it just went up. It didn't turn pointy side up and go up. Like there was no rotation. It was just a cone that would drop up and then side to side.
Yeah. That seems to be the consensus with a lot of the reports about how this thing was moving. A little bit of an unusual part of the report is that it seems that day the wind was blowing in like a southerly southwestern direction. And at least one report had this. I think Boudreaux himself actually said that it was unusual that this craft seemed to be moving against the wind. Like it seemed to be moving like in a northern direction against the wind that they had. Or
so swamp gas is out, weather balloons out.
Or it seems to be. So I mean, that's his. That was his assessment of something strange that
was Mercury, Venus, or Jupiter out. Could they have?
Well, Venus is would be the Air Force's number one suspect for this, because that's what they tried to pin the entire thing on, or they seem to be, that perhaps Mantell or these Venus was supposed to be extraordinarily bright that day and being able to view it. And this is about like in the afternoon or so like that. And so that is one of the ideas that kept popping up, that the Air Force in the beginning, like this is what it was. They want to say that it was this thing. Now you can't really, I would say, I don't know about Venus, maybe some of it, like maybe if it's a combination of the two, but there's actually some type of aircraft, because a lot of people saw this thing moving like up and down, hundreds or thousands of feet and changes in altitude.
Yeah, it's not some fucking atmospheric refraction of Venus. Like to me, I'm like that. That's, am I not smart enough to understand that that's a possibility? Because it seems like a stupid, like to me, whenever I hear that it's, they got lost by the stars, I'm like, I've seen stars. I think everyone on the fuck planet looks up and sees stars. You're telling me you go a little higher and you're like, you're that much closer to the stars that you're like, what is this?
Well, I mean, it could have been, it just seems sometimes it's like the perfect shitstorm of stuff. So he's suffering hypoxia, he's kind of drunk.
There's drifting swamp gas at 15 miles the other way.
Right. There's this craft, and then he's, piloting way above the clouds at this point. And maybe he caught a peek at Venus and started pursuing that. It could be likely, because it does seem to be that, Venus could have actually been out that day and been sufficiently bright enough to cause a little bit of confusion about what he thought he was seeing. So I don't know. I think that's the official explanation that the Air Force kind of came up with, or that's what they put down from the evidence that they gathered. They felt like that was a satisfactory explanation about what happened and what Mantell had been seeing and what he ended up chasing, unfortunately, to his death.
Yeah.
So
I see, and I wonder now. Well, sorry, Dan. Continue your thought before I take this.
But I'm saying, just being Venus does not necessarily explain everything. So I personally wouldn't be like, okay, that's a satisfactory. Okay, done and dusted. We're all done here, shut it down for the day. I would kind of be like, what, really? Like, no, but people were seeing something else out there, not necessarily just Venus.
Now, here's my thing. What is his name? Teraheuchi,
yeah.
Let's remember how we started this case. It's because Teraheuchi, the Japanese UFO, when they sent out they're like, hey, you want military support? He knew about this enough. This is what he referenced and why he says, no, don't send any military planes. If you knew about this, from the official story of like, yes, they saw something. Yes, this guy climbed. Why wouldn't you call the military?
Sorry,
right? Like, why for Terahuchi? Why wouldn't Terahuchi call the military? That's what I'm saying. I don't think that this story of Mantell, I don't think it's the full picture story. I do start to wonder if maybe they did have some engagement between the two.
Well,
right? Of some kind that, you know, between pilots, right? Pilots had, you know, shooting shit with other pilots and stuff, had told the story of like, no, this is like, yeah, fuck that. Yeah, the official story is fucking Mars and this. We saw this stuff, but like that thing shot at us.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly because I'm not in Terahuchi's head or nothing, but I do remember when we were researching it, like that specifically he referenced this case. He was aware of some of the details and whether he was necessarily familiar with the kind of that, like I said before, that unsubstantiated rumor of the small punctures and holes in the thing, whether it you know, it's heavily implied in a lot of UFO books that Mantell was shot down, or perhaps that there was some sort of engagement between his aircraft and this unidentified flying object. But if Terahuchi was kind of operating under that, you know, I think that his reasoning for not having military intervention is like, well, it's either I don't want to put military members at risk if we don't have to. There doesn't need to be more people up here than we need. But it also could have been a fact that be like, well, I don't want to start shit with an alien aircraft. You know, I don't want somebody coming over here and blowing this thing up and starting intergalactic war. I don't know if that was in his head too, but it may have well been. So I just don't know what his motivations were at that moment. It's hard for me to put myself in the shoes of the person who's seen a giant, it's like aircraft carrier sized UFO floating on the wing of my plane. Yeah. So, I mean, it could have been like, why would you send military up here? What are they going to do? You're going to send a couple like F-14s up here and do what? Like what exactly? Like my
blow us all out of the sky?
Yeah, we're all going to die. So yeah, he might have been running through his head too. It's like, I just want to get my crew down. I want to land, and that's all I want to do. If this thing isn't necessarily being super aggressive with us, it's not shooting at us. So I don't know. There's plenty of stuff that we could put in Terahuchi's mind, but I don't think we'll never know unless we just talk to the guy.
Yeah, we got to summon him on a Ouija,
right?
Probably.
So, like, Pickering was actually interviewed later by UFO researcher William E. Jones, and he kind of said the whole thing, you know, it was still kind of fresh in his mind about what they saw and what they thought this thing was, because he kind of clarified, like, the next kind of probable explanation is that it was a weather balloon or some type of weather balloon. And asking him, it's like the weather balloons that they were familiar with in 1948, like all would have been like 15 to 20 feet in diameter, would have been round or ball-like, wouldn't have had like a tail or nothing like that. And they don't really fit with your traditional weather balloon. So that's what he was operating on, the assumption of, that this thing was not just a little weather balloon. Because I think if you look up pictures of kind of 40s and 50s weather balloons, it's really just a balloon with like a string on it, and then it's just like they just let it up and then it goes. Like that's really all it is. Yeah. But there is a different type of balloon that seems to fit the description of
from the devil's foot. Yeah, the magic balloon from the devil's footprints.
Right, the magic balloon from the devil's footprints. I'm not sure that's the same one. I don't think so. But there's a balloon called the Skyhook balloon. Not Operation Skyhook, and it's not the kind of one that you send up like Batman. Is that Dark Knight Rises? Dark Knight. Whichever one where they go to.
That's the Fulton. Hong Kong. Isn't that the Fulton
recovery thing? But yeah, it's also called Skyhook too. There's also like a Skyhook recovery system, and there's the Fulton but there's a Skyhook one too, I think. And so this balloon, if you look it up, this one is like, this is more of the weather balloon that I picture in my head, because if you look this one up, it's got like this long drifting tail, and it's mostly clear. Seems to be made of clear plastic. These were operational, and they were using these ones at the time. but these were relatively new in the late 40s. Yeah, you had these that were made of they were constructed of like a polyethylene material, and so reflecting of light could have happened, or that's at least what experts who are familiar with the construction of these balloons, they say like, yeah, it could have possibly been that thing, because these things are very large. And when you ask a lot of the you go through a lot of the reports and the interviews with people, you have people like PFC Stanley Oliver said it resembled an ice cream cone topped with red. And if you look at skyhook balloons, some of them they have like a red on the top, or they have some red like on the bottom or something. Like it looks like that. And when they talk about a tail drifting out behind it, I'm like, that seems to be it. You had another person, Lieutenant Warner, who said it appeared as like a partially like a parachute with with sun reflecting off the top of the silk. But there also seemed to be some type of red light or something around the lower part of it, whether it was light or just it was that red material. It doesn't necessarily, I think these kind of line up with the skyhook balloon. So it doesn't, I think it gets it cleared, or gets it closer to it.
Except it was going against the wind, right?
Right. So that's what at least one person seemed to report, is that it seemed to be moving against the wind. Whether it was 100%, nobody at the time, from what I can tell, and most of the reports that they gathered, nobody was ever directly under it. So nobody seemed to be right beneath the craft in its direction of travel, or wherever it was going. Didn't seem to be. So people were either like it was miles away, or they seemed to be like in different areas of the in the Kentucky, in that southern Kentucky area. People saw it, but nobody was directly under it. So it's just like it was going up and down and moving wherever it was moving. So maybe they got the wind direction wrong. Not sure. Or maybe the wind direction was going where he was going in a southerly direction. So yeah, I don't. So, I mean, you can't really say that it wasn't, or, I don't think he just said it seemed to be going against the wind. So.
All right. Well, any final thoughts on that? What do you think?
This one, like, cause if this craft were moving in a more erratic fashion, like a more, quick, moving faster. I mean, they said it was moving at like 500 miles per hour. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Like, that seems like that's really fast. And I don't think balloons travel that fast. That's pretty nuts. Like, I think that's a weird remark. And that's kind of a curious description of like what this thing was moving. So whether or not that thing was actually moving at that speed, not 100% sure. I'd like to know, but it really does sound, from the descriptions, like a lot of the descriptions, it does sound like a weather balloon. It does sound like this skyhook balloon. And when you look up pictures of it, you're like, oh yeah, it does kind of look like this. And at least I think there is a report of a skyhook balloon that had been released, not necessarily in the area, but from like another base. And these things were relatively new, and they were using these types of balloons to, as a way to measure like radiation in the atmosphere. I think this was kind of like the precursor to that, or to take special readings, not just weather readings, in high up in the atmosphere and stuff like that. What it was doing below like the cloud line, and what it was doing like way down, apparently like almost touching the ground and then taking back up. I don't know. Faulty balloon? I don't know.
I don't. The only way I can buy the balloon thing, the only way I could possibly buy that is if they got the balloon, it was in fact a balloon, and then everyone else lied in order to like save face for their friends, because they didn't want him to say he went out chasing a weather balloon.
Sure.
That's the only way I could believe that story. I would have to think everyone else was lying to save face, because I just don't think that these kind of pilots, that have that kind of experience are making that mistake. I just don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said before, the balloons that they were familiar with, like they had, I'm sure Mantell was familiar with seeing these weather balloons, which at the time would be made of like a type of like brownish rubber, and we're probably, like we said, 15, 20 feet in diameter, maybe. And I mean, that's definitely not what Godman Tower described seeing. Like they saw something big and they saw something trailing around there. Mantell might have not have thought it was that thing, and he may have not actually realized that this thing was probably way higher than it actually was. This thing could have been 60, 70,000 feet above him, and he just thought this thing was much closer. Like from his, whether he was suffering from hypoxia or something. I mean, I don't see how you couldn't be suffering from hypoxia if you were, you were way up there and you're not even using oxygen at that point. Like I would like that stuff can set in pretty quick. And then plus you had like, it's hard for me to speak to his state of mind, but I would imagine you're 25 years old. Like we said before, you're a 25-year-old pilot in your P-51. You finally get to open that thing up and like, you're going to take a look at this thing and you're just going to, they just tell you, hey, go take a look at this. And you're just like, yeah. And
going just, straight up.
Straight into the danger zone. And your adrenaline is pumping. You're probably so your heart rate's going up. Your breathing becomes faster. And I would assume that you would probably succumb to that, that condition pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So maybe from what he was saying, it could have been that. Could have been something else. If it was an actual UFO, I don't think they engaged in any type of combat or nothing. Like maybe he did see something and then it took off, but I don't think. Because most people said that this thing took up it was overcast that day. Once it got above the clouds, everybody pretty much like lost sight of it once it got up there. So, but it didn't move in any erratic fashion. It wasn't like boom, boom, boom. It wasn't like skipping around the sky or anything. It didn't defy any laws of physics like we get with some fun UFO sightings. It was just kind of like that's what it sounds like to me. That's the song. Exactly. That's the music that plays in my head when I think about this UFO.
Anyways, that's the Mantell UFO incident. As promised, a little companion confidential to go along with case file 1. Is it 181 or 180? I think 180.
180.
The Japanese UFO flight 1648 incident, whatever that one was.
That'd be 181. No, it was 180. You were right.
Oh, perfect. The companion show. Dan, you want to sign us off?
Thanks for listening, everybody. This is ATT Confidential with Braden and Dan. And just remember, always keep it confidential.